bringing you a steady stream of thought-provoking ideas and cutting-edge innovation. You're listening to Society and the State. Life, liberty, and your pursuit of happiness. Now, your hosts, Connor Boyack and Brian Hyde.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 150, exciting milestone here on Society and the State. Brian and I are excited to talk to David Leavitt, a county attorney, elected county attorney here actually in our backyard in Utah County, about a new initiative that he's trying to spearhead, if you can believe it, to actually prosecute fewer crimes potentially. So very kind of quizzical thing to talk about and understand what's going to be happening. David, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
So if you would, could we start maybe a little bit of your background? You're newly elected. You're kind of coming in to do some reform, but this isn't your first rodeo. Could you give us kind of a brief snapshot of what you've been doing that's kind of prepared you for this position?
Well, I have practiced law for roughly almost 30 years, not just a little shy of 30 years. And I started out, I went to law school to join, quite frankly, the family business. And I took a class in the criminal process, and I became absolutely sold on the whole principle of the jury trial and the advocacy and the presumption of innocence. And so I deviated course, and I went to a small town in central Utah with my wife, who's also a lawyer, and we hung a shingle. And I took on a public defense contract and we went to where we went because the public defense contract had a provision that gave preference to in-county residents, and we were the only criminal defense folks in the county, so we got it. And I was a public defender there in private practice for 3 or 4 years, and then in a neighboring county where I was also a public defender, I became the elected prosecutor in Juab County, which was just north of that. And so for 8 years, I was the elected prosecutor in a fairly small county. I prosecuted Utah's first real polygamy case in 50 years that really became the predecessor for all of the heightened sensitivity we have to the abuses that go on inside of closed societies. And shortly after that, I lost the election by 22 votes. And I went from there into the federal system defending as a public defender again. And after a few years of that, I really got to a point where I was burned out from the whole system. And I accepted an opportunity to go to Ukraine. And my wife and I went to Ukraine as volunteers to help reform the Ukrainian judicial system. And we happened to get to Kiev 10 days before Ukraine fell into the Orange Revolution of 2004.
Wow.
And you're standing in this city square with 1.5 million Ukrainians who are demanding and risking, putting everything they have to give on the line and risk everything for something that for me was as common as water coming out of a tap, meaning freedom. It was a complete game changer for all of us as a family when I realized that there's something more to the responsibility of being free than what I've ever understood. And so we took that opportunity in Ukraine, and what we wound up doing was working with university students in Ukraine. We ran a program that would teach law and advocacy, the jury trial, and ethics to university students and young lawyers. And by the time we started in 3 minor universities in Ukraine, and by the time we were finished, we were teaching in 35 universities in Ukraine, Moldova, Poland, and Romania. And after 15 years of that, and we moved back to Utah, I found myself in a situation where I've been a criminal defense attorney for a number of years. I've been an elected prosecutor for 2 terms, 2 4-year terms. I've just spent 14 years in the former Soviet Union, seeing what didn't work there. And I was coming back to a system that when I looked at it with all of the different experiences that I've had in my career, I saw, I could pinpoint it very, very, very easily. We are at a tipping point in our society where if we don't fix the problems of our criminal justice system, we'll lose society as we know it.
David,
I
think one thing that's really interesting about your candidacy and now election, now that you're in this position, is how reform-minded you are. I think the general perception of prosecutors is that they're in it for convictions and, building a career by showing how well and often they can prosecute. Is that a fair characterization that the public has of prosecutors writ large? And whether or not you agree with that, what are you now trying to change? You perceive the system to be in a state of, crisis, if that's a fair way to put it based on what you just said, a tipping point. What are you trying to do about it in this new position that you have?
Well, we have to redefine what we prosecute, why we prosecute. We need to redefine how we punish people, how we rehabilitate people. Efforts in the past to reform our criminal justice system have been referred to as restorative justice, and I take the term restorative justice and say that's a good start, but it presupposes that we're going to restore someone or something to a state where they were before, and that's not been my experience with people who are participants of the criminal justice system. That they're not; these are not people who started out at a good place and wound up as criminals. These are people who were victims of crime to begin with, oftentimes, who were victims of very poor upbringings, who were victims of poor neighborhoods, who are victims of failed school systems, and so the concept of restoring that's not what we're after. What we're after is the ability to look at a human being who's in our criminal justice system and say, we want to help you recognize the potential that you have as a human being. And just like we redeem a stock certificate from a piece of paper to money, something of higher value, we're going to redeem this individual from a person who simply has potential to a person who's realizing that potential.
Can I?
Before you go
please,
on,
go ahead.
No, let me finish this thought. Also, when as a society we do poorly, and then we do better, we have to redeem ourselves. And so I call this initiative that I have redemptive justice, because we have to redeem the people in it, but as important, maybe more important, we have to redeem ourselves. We have to redeem ourselves from the poor job we've done with criminal justice.
So let's give kind of an example to, if you can help illustrate the mechanics of this process and how it differs. As I understand the existing system, right, let's use the common case of someone for simple drug possession, which you've shared, comprises a large number of the cases that your office has to spend time working on, potentially to the exclusion of more time spent on more serious cases. And so right now, if, let's say, Connor is caught with illicit controlled substances, I can be charged with a misdemeanor. I have a fine. In some cases, my driver license can be suspended. But a lot of these folks, and just continuing to use me as an example, I'm not going to pay the fine. Maybe I don't have money. If my license is suspended, I can't go to work to earn more money to pay off the fine. And if it's that can lead to property crimes, where if I have a habit, I'm trying to pay for things I need and buy the next fix and so on and so forth. And so what happens in a lot of cases is these people cycle through the system and rack up many convictions, many sentences and punishments, compounding the problem and further spiraling them down into a hole that they are probably unable to dig themselves out of. Could we start there and first of all push back if you feel I've unfairly characterized, obviously broadly speaking, the status quo of some of the challenges that we can have, especially with these lower level crimes. And once we've kind of established that baseline, Could you walk us through this new program that you're setting up and how Connor in that situation would have a potentially different experience?
Well, I've got no pushback for your articulation of what the problem is. That is, and I suppose the only pushback that I would give is that that's only part of the problem, right? Because while we have this churn of people who are in and out of the system perpetually, and while we've been spending so much of our resources on that, we have a whole segment of crime that never gets prosecuted that should get prosecuted. And so that's an element of the problem as well. And you know, and the other pushback I guess I would give is that this is not a glitzy initiative. This is an effort at changing the perspective and the mindset of the American people as to how we view crime and the role of government in regulating that conduct. And so, you know, this is not my effort is not to put some program together that's going to take care of low-level offenders in my county and then call it good. My effort is to demonstrate what we can do differently in my county and then take that on the road to help other people do the same thing.
Great. Okay, so Connor in low-level crime, he's caught. I'm arrested, or potentially, you know, just cited and told to report. It's referred to prosecuting in your office, but you've got this new program. What happens differently to Connor if not, you know, prosecution, conviction, sentencing, the traditional route? What are you going to do for people in these situations that you think improves justice and redemption?
Well, when you bring someone like this, when you bring the Connor in, for example, you have to recognize that Connor's problem is a unique problem all its own, and there aren't matrices, there aren't, you know, flow charts that necessarily will say what we do with him. We have to recognize the individuality of that individual. I mean, and we do that because if we don't recognize the individual problem, we can't find an individual solution. We have a criminal justice system that has concerned itself more with efficiency than it has with results. And you know, if you're going to build a huge brick building, you still have to examine every brick. And that's what, you know, every person we deal with is an individual brick that we have to deal with. And so we bring that person in, and first off, we think, okay, are you someone that has any interest in changing? And if you don't have any interest in changing, then we say, then we're not going to spend our resources to help you to change when you don't want to change. Mm-hmm. If you're interested in changing, then we will utilize the time and talents of the American people, in my case, the residents of Utah County, as volunteers. We'll have a sponsor for you who will help form a connection with you, because the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And we'll help connect you with someone who will help you and be your sponsor and help you to manage life, because your problem is not substance abuse. Your problem is that you turn to substance abuse as a result of the deeper problem. Mm-hmm. Maybe you can't keep a job. Maybe you're feeling lots of pain. Maybe you're this. Maybe you're that. And so that person will help the person to identify that. Now, if you're and we'll have, you know, it might be courses on budgeting. It might be courses on life skills. It might be courses on you know, just how to get a job. Who knows what it is? But we'll help you to find a way to get through that pattern. And rather than charging you and putting you through the system again, we'll say, if you do X, Y, and Z, we won't charge you. And give them a motive, because the motivation that the current system gives is we won't put you in jail or incarcerate you if you do X, Y, and Z. But they never tell you that the worst thing that we're going to give you is we're going to give you, before we give you that motivation, we brand you as a criminal.
Right. You've got a record.
Branding you as a criminal is the worst punishment you're going to get. So there's not a lot of motivation to change.
Yeah.
We're pulling that back, and we're saying we're not going to brand you as a criminal if you do X, Y, and Z. And X, Y, and Z has to include a punishment. It's got to be close in time to the behavior. It has to, X, Y, and Z has to include life skill stuff. X, Y, and Z has to include something that makes you a better person. Now, if we run you through that program and we help you get out of that cycle, then, society's better off. If you're a person that says, you know what, or we think you're a person that doesn't want to change, and we can see that you're on your 47th conviction, we're not going to help society better by giving you a 48th. And we're sure as heck not going to, and you're not violent, you just don't listen to what, society says. So we're going to give you a very stiff sentence that says, a very stiff thing, that's a penalty that says, but this community-based, go serve somebody, go fix this yard, go rake that part, do something that has you paying society for your bad deed, not society supporting you in jail because that's just the way we do things. And the current model is we're working for all these people because we house them, and we feed them, and we clothe them. We need to reverse that so that they're working for us. And their own self-interest at some point will motivate that they'll change. Because if they don't, we'll say, okay, go do that, and we'll see you back in 6 weeks when you do it again.
Right.
It's like Otis, and it's the Otis example in Andy Griffith. A lot of these people are Otises, and they don't want to change, and so we will deal with them in a way that minimizes the impact on society, that doesn't clog our court system, that doesn't burden prosecutors' offices and defense attorneys, et cetera, understanding that the moment that one of these people does something that truly hurts society, we're going to lock you up.
Yep.
Because it's a question of prioritizing what we prosecute, not letting criminals go.
Well, it's something novel and visionary, I think, for sure. I know that as we've been watching it, there's a lot of eyeballs, right, to see how this goes and how it can help change. Like you, we're very interested in seeing this program succeed and then go on the road because around the country, I think there's increasingly a recognition that there needs to be some prosecutorial reform. That prosecutors have disproportionate power in the criminal justice system. They wield substantial authority to determine the outcome of any given criminal incident, and that authority might need to be restrained. It might need to be diverted to a more productive and redemptive path, such as you're setting up. So very interested and eager to see how things go. David, thank you very much for joining us. David Leavitt is the county attorney in Utah, setting up a new program that we will be watching closely and sharing more with our listeners. SocietyandTheState.com, episode 150. David, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Society and the State. For show notes, archives, and more great content, visit SocietyandTheState.com.